So Lone Mountain Truck Leasing. In this video, I'm going to talk about my story and how you can avoid the nightmare. So let's be honest, everybody loves a good train wreck. If you look at YouTube, you can see that the crash videos and the videos making fun of Swift and, you know, all the terrible story videos, those do way better than the happy-go-lucky videos and the happy videos. It's just human nature. So they say there's no news like bad news, and that's true. So, but in this video, it's gonna be very informational, it's very structured, and I'm not gonna ramble. So stick around and we're gonna get right into it. So why is it that all you hear about are horror stories? Well, there's a couple reasons. One of those reasons is there's no news like bad news, and like I said before, everybody likes a good train wreck. So when someone posts a video, man, my engine blew up, or the transmission just fell out, you know, these things tend to travel way faster than I get 8 miles per gallon, or I've gone 100,000 miles with nothing more than oil changes. Those just don't happen. You know, nobody wants to hear about that. You know, everybody's dealing with their own challenges in their life, and they want to hear about somebody else that it has it worse than them. So that's why these videos do better than the happy-go-lucky videos. So you're going to see more horror stories than you are good stories. Another thing to keep in mind is that the people that use Lone Mountain typically, not always, but are generally first-time buyers and haven't, you know, they're not really established. Maybe they're making that jump from either company to owner-op, or, you know, maybe lease operator to owner-operator. Now, technically, these trucks are leased, but that's a different type of lease operator that I'm speaking of. So now that you understand that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna explain to you my story, my experience with Lone Mountain, and then I'm gonna give you 5 things that you need to master if you wanna be successful using Lone Mountain as your tool to get there. So the day that I bought my truck, I arrived at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and when I got there, I basically went straight to the truck and I searched that thing with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, I was crawling all over that thing, I was crawling under that thing, I was opening things, I was taking parts off of the truck. At one point, my salesman came out to me and he said, "Don't shoot the messenger, but my manager says you have to stop pulling parts off in the parking lot." And I said, well, if he wants me to buy this truck, he's gonna let me do what I need to do. And that's exactly what I did. You know, I went through it for about 6 hours. You know, by the time that I went back in, did all the paperwork, and actually drove off the lot, it was nearly 5 o'clock, and I got there at 8. Now, the reason I told you that is because in the amount of time that I was there, three other guys came there. They arrived after me. They drove their truck. They came straight back. Not one of them popped the hood. They went inside, did their paperwork, and they left before I was even inside doing my paperwork. And that's just a testament of, you know, kind of the people that are purchasing these trucks. You know, they have smaller down payments, they have easier or more lax, you know, regulations or stipulations in order to purchase these trucks. And so you get a lot of inexperience buying these trucks, and that's just flat out what it is. They just don't necessarily know what they're looking for, and you know, they're thinking, well, I'm buying a new to me truck, so it's going to take good care of me and I'm going to make all the money in the world. Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works, and if you're not educated, you need to educate yourself. I did not grow up mechanically inclined. I have struggled with that side of things, but you know, there are tools, there are resources, there are people that you can, you know, network with and contact and, you know, have on that speed dial in case you have an urgent question or you need to figure something out. Those are the people that you need to surround yourself with. Don't be the smartest person in your circle. Surround yourself with the smartest people, that the different areas that you lack, your weaknesses. And that's going to help you to be more successful. So I've had my truck for, it's about 180,000 miles. I bought it with roughly 450,000 on it, and I've got roughly 630,000 on it right now. I've never been on the side of the road. I've never broken down. I've always been able to get my truck into the shop if there's an issue. And as far as issues are concerned, I've really only had a couple. I had a problem with the fuel rail, and that was actually just the sensor. Everything else has been just maintenance, just things that you have to do along the way. So about my actual truck, my truck is a 2013 Kenworth T660, and it has a 2012 Cummins 2250 motor in it. And there's specific reasons why I went with this truck. There were Cascadias that were available that had Detroits in them, that had 13 speeds in them, that had dual tires. And I still went with the Kenworth, even knowing all of that. Because in my opinion, the Cummins motor, I just had access to Roz. And I'll link his stuff in the description down below. Roz is the man when it comes to Cummins. He basically knows it all. I also went with my truck because it was a Kenworth. And I was thinking forward, I was thinking about resale value or trade value, and just flat out, Kenworths are worth more than Freightliners. It's just the way it is. So that's why I chose this truck. But let's go ahead and get into the 5 things that you must know in order to be successful. And also understand that while I'm talking about this, I'm going to be talking about the used trucks that Lone Mountain sells, not the new trucks. Just to touch on those really quickly. Actually, the new trucks are a really good deal if the specifications of the truck that you are looking at fit your application for what you're going to be using it for. You need to look at the motor, you need to look at the transmission, you need to look at, you know, the gear ratio. If all of these things make sense to you, then their new truck purchase program is actually pretty solid. So if these trucks fit your application, they are a fantastic way to get a brand new truck. So keep that in mind. Back to the used trucks. Number 1, understand what you are getting. You are getting a used truck, but you also need to know where they're coming from. And I'm not 100% positive on this. However, I am pretty sure that the majority of these trucks are bought in bulk from the mega carriers. And my truck personally was a Conway truck. I did what's called a rig dig, and that's rig dig, and it's basically the Carfax for trucks. It'll tell you, you know, where it's from, it'll tell you how many owners it's had, it'll tell you if it's been in an accident. So that, if you're looking at buying a truck, that's mandatory. So anyway, you need to understand what it is that you're getting. It's coming from mega carriers, and the way that these mega carriers operate, you know, it's not a knock on them because that's their business model, and obviously it's very profitable, but you know, their business model, they have so many trucks that they do the absolute minimum maintenance that they need to do in order to keep the warranty in effect. And that's not to say that they all operate like that, but the majority do. And it's an unfortunate thing, but you know, these trucks have parts on them that wear out, that need to be replaced, because it's like a snowball effect. You know, like for instance, let's talk about bushings on the suspension. If your bushings are going bad, then your suspension parts are wearing out, you know, your axles are wearing out, your tires are going to have faster wear on them and abnormal wear. So if you don't replace these things in the proper time frame, then those things are going to be worn out. And if you're keeping this truck for a long period of time, you know, and you're not replacing these things at the right intervals, then you're going to have multiple problems, and the truck's going to cost you more and more. So the mega carriers don't always do that type of maintenance because, once again, it's not keeping that warranty up for them, so they don't really see the need in order to do that. And a lot of times what happens is these issues get passed along to the next person that buys the truck. I mean, do you know how to check for a bushing? That's an upcoming video that I will talk about, because that's something that's kind of important, and it's actually something that I just learned recently, so I'm going to be happily pass that knowledge along to you guys. But understand what it is that you are actually getting for your money. And number two, speaking of money, you can actually purchase a Lone Mountain truck with a smaller bank account. Hold up! Don't roast me yet, listen and hear me out. Now, the way I would recommend you buying a new truck, if you want to do it right, I would do it one of two ways. I would either have $30,000 to $40,000 in the bank and finance the truck, or I would buy a truck outright from an owner-operator that was either one, retiring, or two, buying a new truck and he just wants to sell his outright. Because that owner-operator that's been doing this for a long time is going to have probably all of the maintenance records. He's going to know all the nuances of the truck. There are little nuances that happen with each individual truck, and it's great to actually have that knowledge. You know, you need to know what speed he was running. You need to know what speed gets the maximum fuel mileage out of the truck. Any owner-operator worth their salt is going to know that. And he can pass along all of this information to you, he or she, and you're gonna have such a head start on that truck because you know what to expect from it, and it's gonna give you a much better chance of success, and you're probably getting a much better truck out of it. But what I mean by smaller bank account is you can have, like, let's say $15,000 to $20,000 cash. Yes, that actually stipulates smaller bank account. You still need a large sum of money in order to ensure success, I would say. But along with that smaller bank account, you better have a large amount of available credit to you. I'm not advocating working on credit. I'm just advocating a backup plan and a safety net. So you can get away with that smaller bank account simply because the smaller down payment and the smaller monthly payments. That's all I'm saying. And number three is you better get that thing tuned as soon as possible. The reason being is because, you know, these trucks typically have anywhere from 400 to 600,000 miles on them. And that puts them back in the range of when the DPF system really had only been around for roughly 3, 4, 5 years. And that's just simply not enough. You know, these motors that have these DPF system on them were fairly new, and they were still trying to work this all out. They were still learning about them. They didn't really know how to make them effective. Unfortunately, it caused a large chunk of trucks that are basically crap. And these DPF systems have just choked the life out of all of these motors, and that's why, you know, a lot of your guys that have been on the road for a long time are driving those 2000 to 2004 model, maybe 2005 model trucks or engines, motors, and because they're terrified about this DPF system. You know, what happens is it chokes the life out of it. It clogs up the motor with carbon packing. And when you get this carbon packing, one, you get a lot of blow-by. You know, two, it's easier for liners to slip. It's just basically your main components of that motor have a much higher fail rate than without that DPF system. And because these motors were, you know, such new technology, not only were they not built properly, well, they were also not maintained properly. You know, you really need to do an EGR tune-up pretty much every year if you want to keep that DPF system on your truck. And not only that, you cannot idle these things. You just cannot do it. And that's another scary thing about the mega carriers is they idle their trucks. It's not cost effective for them to actually put APUs on them because they don't keep them long enough to see those returns, and they're not concerned about the motor basically beyond about 400,000 miles. So sadly, a lot of these motors are basically choked up. So in turn, your maintenance is going to be through the roof. And that's something that you need to know. Now, to alleviate that DPF maintenance, get it tuned. And then in turn, all those other things, like I referred to the bushings earlier, you're gonna have to bring this truck up to par. So you're gonna need to expect much higher maintenance for the first couple of years, so that way you get it running properly going down the road, and then you don't expect major things to go wrong with it. So those higher maintenance costs, you need to have very low bills in order to offset that higher maintenance cost, and then eventually it'll level out once you have a proper truck. But a lot of guys don't take that into account. They see that small down payment, they maybe have a couple grand behind, and basically one major thing goes wrong and they're sank because they haven't, you know, had that suspension work done, which is expensive, by the way, and it's just causing multiple problems. They can't understand why they're going through, you know, a set of drives every single year, and it's just draining. Then that first major blowout, which is probably going to be a turbo, possibly a transmission, heaven forbid some liners, it just sinks them. So number 4 is you need to understand the specifications of the truck, and then you need to understand the application of those specs on those particular trucks. Now, in Roz's book, which I've referred to earlier, he has a section, and it's basically how to buy a truck. And the title of this book, it talks about like the lease operator, but really it's a book on how to buy a truck and then how to maintain a truck. And he actually gives you a maintenance schedule, which is not all inclusive, but if you follow that maintenance schedule, you're gonna be way ahead of the game. But the first thing that he talks about that you should do is you should actually look to see what it is you want to do. What application do you want to apply a truck to? Figure out that application first, and then you can go searching for the right truck, and that's going to maximize your profits on this end, because you probably don't want to buy the majority of these Lone Mountain trucks and turn it into a heavy haul truck. That's just not a good idea. It's going to cost you a lot more money, and you're not going to benefit from merging those two things. So you need to look at the application. What is it that you want to do? Then look at the specifications on the trucks and see if that actually fits what it is you're trying to accomplish. Real quick example, a lot of the gear ratios on these Lone Mountain trucks is kind of absurd. That's one big beef that I would say that I have with them. My truck has 253 rears. Yes, you heard that right, 253, and I've triple and quadruple checked, so I know that that's accurate. It's kind of ridiculous, and especially in a flatbed operation where you are basically dragging the load instead of hauling the load, if you understand what I mean. But the reason I wasn't necessarily hesitant to get this truck, even though it had those tall gears, was because I have a 1-to-1 transmission in this truck. So when I'm doing, you know, when I have 1500 RPMs, I'm at 68 miles an hour. I'm not at, you know, like 75. So it does help with the fuel mileage a little bit, and I try to keep it on flat ground. But you know, you have really tall gears, you don't want to be in the Northwest. You're just not going to make a whole lot of money with one of these trucks. But if you can keep it down south, or even possibly in the Midwest, that's going to be much better for you. So understand the specifications of these trucks and make sure that they fit what it is that you're trying to do and the location that you're going to be running in order to maximize your profits. Because if you don't do that, you're really working against yourself, and that's just not good. And number 5, and this is an ongoing topic, this is something that's never going to stop, is educate yourself. And what I mean by that is, here's another example. I'm not necessarily mechanically inclined, so I can't pick apart an engine, I can't really look at an engine and, you know, tell you what exactly is wrong with it. I have to go and find and research what specifically this motor had issues with. And what I came up with is the fuel pump on these trucks, the guts were basically, they were made of ceramic, you know, rollers and such. And unfortunately, the ceramic was detrimental if those actually happened to break, and they didn't have the long life that whatever the previous material was made of. So these fuel pumps would malfunction, and in between 300 and 400 miles, your whole motor was completely shot. So knowing things like that will keep you from having some just ginormous breakdown. It's scary, but pretty much all motors kind of have their nuances, and so, you know, just do your research, you know, look at these things, figure these things out. For whenever I was in the shop recently, I was talking to the mechanics. I wasn't in the driver's lounge, I wasn't eating out of the popcorn machine, I wasn't taking a nap. I was learning, because these guys have the knowledge that I don't. So I find the guy that's smoking the cigarette or is taking the break, and I try to pick his brain. You know, I mean, try to be friendly about it. You can't walk up to somebody with grumpy face and expect them to have a general, you know, have a nice conversation with you and share their knowledge. You know, this is part of that whole networking thing that we talked about in the first Successful Owner-Operator video, which I will link right there. Networking is a huge skill that you need to have, so that way you can talk with people and you can extract knowledge from them, and they'll be willing to share with you because you're friendly, because you know how to network. But basically, I didn't know how to look at bushings and be able to tell if they were going bad. But I knew that I needed to know this because I've heard, you know, I've heard it multiple times. And so just out of curiosity, I said, hey man, you know, how do I check for bushings? How do I check for that wear? And he went in to a 10-minute conversation and told me everything that I needed to know about bushings. And that's a great thing. But anyway, I hope you grabbed something from this video. I hope you learned something, because this really applies to not only Lone Mountain, this applies to all trucks. So take this knowledge and apply this knowledge. If you apply this knowledge, you are going to have a much better chance of success, and I'll keep you from creating one of those horror stories that everybody loves to watch on YouTube. But hit that like button on the way out. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. But as always, stay driven.